Okay, cool. Keith, thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are talking about mobility and strength training as you age, longevity, physical feats as you get older, and what you can really achieve with time. Someone who I have had the great pleasure of coaching and someone who's really wowed the entire FMF team with his feats of strength and speedy improvements is Keith from Australia, who started mobility training with us earlier this year and has really impressed us with his entire philosophy on movement, health, and everything that he has done throughout his life, and also starting mobility training now in his retirement. So today we want to learn more from this amazing man on this podcast. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have this chat because when we first had our consultation, I don't know how long it lasted. It was very long because I was very, very interested in everything you had to say. And of course, I had to do my job as well with the mobility training part. But we are, all very fascinated with your incredible feats. And I don't know if you'd be happy for us to share some of your videos at some point. But it's very impressive what you can do. And what got you into training originally and when?
Right. I suppose it began in, would it be 1956 or 57? When my father said, you've got to stop mincing, you've got to learn to walk properly and run properly. And he sent me out into the street to run up and down in the front of our block, a few times every week until he thought I was getting more on the direction of being a man. And then in late 1957, I had the really good fortune. That was the year after the Olympic Games in Melbourne, Australia. And in that year, Hungary was under a lot of pressure from Russia and the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union took over. And the Hungarian Olympic team, some of them defected to Australia in 1956. And one of the defectors was the coach of their gymnastics team. And he then, as a refugee, came to our town. And he set up as a coach, was given some help by our church, and coached the church boys club. And so I had an Olympic coach at the age of 7, helping me to do, running somersaults and learning springboards and the gymnastic bar and all those sorts of things at that age. I didn't realize how good he was at the time, but that really helped to get me on the go. And so that's something that I was taken to every week by my father. And then I started to become a little bit more self-motivated. And at about the age of 14, I got into weights, but there were no gyms in our town. And so I used window counterweights. When you've got sliding windows and they're easy to lift, that's because inside the window frame, there's a bit of cast iron that is the same, that sort of counters the weight of the window frame. And I was using those for pecs and things like that, and
sort of
fooling
like
around with those.
Machine.
That's right, yes. And I read books and magazines because there was no internet then, and there were no movies about fitness. And then I got into cross-country running and rowing at school. And at the school rowing shed, there were barbells, and so I did a few barbell squats. And that's really how I got into it. That takes me through to the end of my school years.
Yeah, and then you've continued on your whole life.
Yeah, it just sort of seemed natural because I liked the cross-country running, and there was a big culture of that at the time. This was still in the afterglow of Bannister's 4-minute mile, and then there were some Australian runners who were world famous. There was Herb Elliott, there was John Landy. They were more or less contemporaries of the British Roger Bannister and his contemporaries. And that was the big thing at that time, about the 1 mile running. And I kept up running for, the next 20 years or so. And in 1988, I took part in the Olympic trial, the Australian Olympic trial for the marathon. But it was one that was open to anybody. It wasn't one that I needed to qualify for. And so I did that in 3 hours, 26 minutes, not 2 hours, 26. But I did finish it. I always kept fit as well for wilderness bushwalking. I did a lot of wilderness bushwalking in Australia. But I went to university in the UK, and I was there in 1976, which was a very dry year. And my wife and I walked up the Pennine Way. We did that in 20 days, and we carried all our own things, tents, and we stayed out every night. And so that was about 20 miles a day for a fortnight.
Wow.
From the Peak District up over the Scottish border.
And that must have been
that means any time I look at a globe of the world, I can say, well, I walked from here to here, and it's a measurable distance.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an achievement. But I did a lot of wilderness bushwalking in Australia with my sons, quite heavy packs, because there are no pubs or other places to stay. So you've got to carry everything with you, including in summer, you've got to have a good supply of water as well. So you're carrying, at least I was carrying, well over 30 kilos of weight.
Wow.
And when my sons got into rowing, I had a bit of a flashback to my own rowing at school. And so I decided to get into rowing as well. And I did. I got into masters rowing and also into ergometer rowing, the rowing machines, the Concept 2s. And that probably brings me up to about my mid-40s. Yeah.
We still have way more to go after that, because you're doing amazing things now. You're lifting so much, so well, and your mobility training came along very quickly. I know you wanted it to come along faster, because I think you always train very, very hard. But really, it came along very quick. And I think, obviously, because you've done so much and you've practiced so much, you've got such a good neuromuscular control. You've obviously practiced so many different movements. It's come along faster. And that was impressive to see. And so what would you say? I mean, personally, I train a lot so that I can go out into nature, like what you just said, going, walking all that way and being able to experience the world and do things. Would you say that's one of the perks of what you do, or what else do you really like the side effects of?
I like to be able to stand up and do what the Americans call yard work, this gardening and splitting firewood and DIY around the house, and to be able to do that all day without ever needing to rest. I can just do that easily for 8 or 10 hours of work without being tired, without even thinking about being hungry, just going on and doing it. And that's fantastic. To me, it seems natural, but it's not what most people do, in their retirement.
I think most people don't even know it's possible.
That's right. Well, you just, if you are, well, my experience, if you're strong, then you just take it in your stride. I'm really, one of the things I'm really interested in doing is seeing what happens when I hit 75 in a few months' time, because I've been told that about that age, then sarcopenia hits in. That's that age-related muscle loss that people talk about. Well, so far, I think I reckon that it's not. There's very little that's necessarily age-related muscle loss. It's more muscle loss through lack of activity.
Yeah, I would agree.
or reduced activity. Now,
Yeah.
very often you've got you've got no way to keep on going if you've got some sort of illness or some sort of heart condition, or you've had a car accident, or your spouse is ill and has to be looked after all the time, or whatever.
Mhm.
But all things, if all things go in your favor, I think you can probably stay, in my personal experience, without any significant muscle loss into your mid-70s.
I think so. There's a lot of recent studies, a few recently that Callum actually mentioned. I haven't personally read it, so I'll need to ask him about it. But he said something about reading a recent study on how movement can actually prevent sarcopenia in a much older age. So I need to find that study and reread it and send it to you. But I think they're finding, what you just said. So
Yes, and just going back to what you said too, about progress with mobility work. There's that exercise where you do the stretch, like that, and
Mhm.
sorry,
Yep.
this sort of thing.
Yep.
And when I first started that, I thought I'd never be able to do it, and then within about a fortnight, I was able to do it, moderately competently.
Yeah.
And so some of the exercises show improvement just in a matter of weeks.
They do.
Or even days, but others take a whole lot longer.
Yeah, it's crazy that with mobility training, it's very much to do with adapting how your connective tissue works. And we're not really programmed to think about exercise in that way. It's a very, very slow, sort of unusual process. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
why am I doing this? It's taking so long. But I do think it needs to be studied more. And I think there's something to be said about training so many varieties of exercise and being very, very active your whole life, and how that speeds things up. Because really, the progress you made should have taken essentially years if you weren't active. But because you're so active, it's within a few weeks to a month, you were already showing signs of years of progress. So as annoying as it is, these are tiny angles that change, but they really do impact quite a large potential of movement after that, especially with the thoracic area. That's something that's associated with getting your spine is associated with getting stiffer as you age, but that's not necessarily 100% necessary to happen. Yeah.
Yep. Now, you were going to also, we were going to talk about who trained me and things like that was something you mentioned.
Yes,
and
it's very interesting that you happen to sort of just chance upon an Olympic coach.
Well, that of course lasted only while I was associated with that school, that church boys club, and I left that probably at the age of, say, 13 or 14. I grew out of that, and I didn't really have any coach until, again, I had an exceptional coach for about a year. There was a fellow who was helping my wife with training at the gym, and he was an Olympic decathlete. And the thing you learn from decathletes is that you've got to learn a lot. He was a champion pole vaulter and shot putter and discus thrower, and he did all those sorts of things. And he was also in the Winter Olympics too, as a bobsleigh team member at the back of the bobsleigh, the guy who gives them the first shove. Anyway, so he was into very dynamic work, plyometrics, and really throwing yourself into it. And he's still an active physiotherapist in Canberra. So I stayed with him for about a year, and he really gave me the mindset of aiming high. He'd say, this is what we did in Olympic training. You have a go at this, and also sort of having an all-round competence. And one thing I'll always remember when I first met him was at the gym, just putting the plates back on the rack. He'd lift off 2 at a time, 2 20s at a time. I just think of people lifting off 1 at a time, which is what I do. And for him, it was just natural to lift off 2 at a time, and it looked just as if he was lifting a 10-kilo plate. And just little things like that stick in your mind. And then, so I've aimed to do that ever since, a few little things like that. My son is exceptionally strong. He's taken things a step further than me, and he does that with 3 20-kilo plates. But no, but there are some things that unless you actually see them, you just don't realize how possible they are.
Yeah, I mean, you recently sent me a very impressive video of your deadlift. Was it 200 and how much did you?
213 kilos.
Yeah.
But as you can see, I was working quite hard in that.
Yeah, well, it's a fair amount of weight.
That's right. But, the way I'm training is just at the very top level to do just singles, not aiming for the sort of 5x5 that younger blokes talk about in the gym.
Yeah.
Certainly not with deadlifts. I do that with a few other exercises, but not with the deadlift, where I'm really aiming to get to the very top. And what I'd like to do is to do my personal best deadlift at the age of 75.
That would be amazing. And so far, I think you're racing towards that. So
I think so. I mean, I use a trap bar. I don't use a straight bar. If I was using it with the high handle, most trap bars have 2 handle positions. I think I could do it with the high handle, but I want to do it with the low handle, just at the same level as a normal barbell.
Yeah,
that's my aim. Yep.
Yeah, that barbell also looks relatively, I can't tell from the video, but it kind of doesn't look like it has a great grip. So that's also quite impressive. It looks kind of like shiny.
Oh, no, it's got very nice knurling, and I do use chalk.
Yeah.
But my grip isn't a problem. The over 200 kilos, my limiting factor is certainly not my grip.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's just everything.
It's just everything altogether. I don't think there's a part you're not going to feel.
My face feels as if it's exploding outwards.
Well, you managed it okay, and usually when I attempt a 1 rep max, my face does turn quite a different color, and you managed to still remain looking human. So that was impressive. Yeah. What kind of advice would you give to someone, say in their 20s and 30s, who want to achieve longevity and fitness for life? What do you think are the main components that you really need to include throughout your life?
I'd say try to establish a fitness and diet regime that works for you by your own experiments and just being consistent. So if you plan your exercise and your mobility sessions on paper in advance, and if you record your performance as you go during your workout sessions, just make comments on, that worked and this didn't, or next time try, fewer reps or more reps, or, just whatever comes to your mind as you're going, rather than adjusting your playlist on your iPhone. Just jot things down as you go, and then use those written notes when you're planning your next session. So when I plan my session, I write it all out, and then I've got beside me every time what I did in the last 2 sessions and all the comments that I've got against those, and so I can remember what I planned to do, how I felt at the time, and what I thought I could do this time, and that keeps some sort of discipline. Yeah. And I'd also say, and this is always very difficult for younger blokes, and women, I guess, but particularly men, don't get sucked into any fads. Yeah. But on the other hand, don't be afraid to be unconventional. So, for a young fellow in their 20s and 30s, or a woman too, doing mobility work would be seen as being a little bit superfluous or a bit unusual, but that isn't a fad. That's something that's unconventional but very useful. And I'd say how to tell the difference between things that are fads and unconventional is the sort of rules we use for food. People say, stick to natural foods. Don't go for anything that's advertised or has a trademark or, is made by the global food industry. Same with fitness and exercise. Do exercises that don't require special gear or advertised programs, or that are promoted in the media or use trademarked products again. That'd be my benchmark there. And if you can, and I know this is almost like telling someone to get religion, but see if you can make fitness into a hobby, but not an obsession. And if you can become recognized as someone who's fit and healthy because they work at it and enjoy working at it, you can be a bit of an inspiration to other people too. And you've really got to cultivate self-discipline and be a self-starter and work on becoming someone who never needs someone else to motivate you. You're always motivated. I've only realized recently that most good personal trainers spend most of their time, and I'd say waste much of their time, just motivating people and trying to get them along to the gym, get them to do the exercises. It seems such a waste of all that skill that people have in terms of coaching and physiology and anatomy, and they know all that, and they've got to be practical psychologists as well. And
something that they will talk about.
Any good young trainer, especially in their 20s and 30s, should be able to bring that with them, and just let the personal trainer and the people in the gym do their own special stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things that I actually noticed first thing that when you came along to our mobility sessions is you sent me all these beautiful notes. And that's something that I've always done, Callum always does, and we recommend that everyone does, is to write down what works, what doesn't. And so you've got a log of what's happening. And obviously that's how we coach through True Coach. You can give us your detailed notes, and it's very, very useful. And without that information, you're not going to remember what you did, let alone your coach isn't going to know what you're doing, or how you're feeling. And that bit of information and analysis I'd say that's where all the magic happens, rather than the motivation side. The motivation side is kind of like, well, if you don't have it, no one's going to force you. Like, I can't force feed you food you don't like. You got to come and actually want to eat it. But then, the analysis side, that's when you can use information and in a way you can learn for yourself what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah, that goes for exercise as well as for mobility. Yep. Yeah,
it goes. It's one of the biggest things. I also very much agree with. That makes a big difference.
I find it useful too when I'm planning the next mobility session, to know how long it's going to take. And if I've got the past records, I know that combination, if I keep at it, I can do, within 3/4 of an hour or an hour or an hour and a quarter or whatever it turns out to be, so I can fit it into the day. Then I really feel, I've got a combination of exercises I can do, that I don't have to just drop because I haven't got time.
Yeah, it's very important. And I suppose this is all different for everyone. I guess one specific exercise can take someone a very, very long time, and other people much shorter. And obviously, as you go along, you're going to be faster at it and more proficient at it. But that's one thing I do think comes up a lot, is people saying, oh, this took me longer than I thought it was going to take. And it's a bit of a process. So you do have to be committed and write down and a lot of notes so it can be perfected.
That's right, and everybody is different too. I noticed that with a couple of the exercises you've given me, you've said do 10 reps, and I've thought, well, 10 reps, I didn't really feel as if anything much was happening, and I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and now I do 35 reps on that exercise, because I know that at about the 25 point, I feel different. I feel as if I've got a rhythm. I feel as if there's a little bit wider range of movement, but it only happens after about, in my case, number 25. And if I only did 10, I'd never get there.
Yeah, and that's a real thing. It's something we do try to put in our disclaimers and in the sort of, there's a little bit of description in front of the program. I don't really know how it looks like on your app, but it says that we have different tissue types, and we fall somewhere different on the scale. So the amount of time we say do dynamic or passive stretches may differ based on your tissue type, and obviously based on your also your neurological pathways, whether you've done something similar before or not. So many different factors fall into that, but it really matters that the person doing the exercise listens to their body and can figure out where that special point is. So the rep ranges to me almost don't matter as much. It's a rough guide, but ultimately what you just said is that's again where the magic happens, where you're really listening to your body, you're writing down what works. And that's also not as easy to do as, say, like you're changing your music around, you're just doing it without thinking. You're not gonna figure out whether you've hit that point.
That's right. Well, with exercise and with the mobility, I find I'm learning new things still every day. For example, just 4 days ago, I was doing deadlifts, not really heavy ones, just sort of 3/4 my 1 rep max weight, just doing 9 sets of 3. And I realized as I was going through that what I normally do is I sort of pause at the bottom and then sort of take the strain and then lift. And I thought to myself, no, I know I can lift this. I don't have to pause. I can just go in, grab it and lift. And I did that for the first time, just, a few days ago. And that was fantastic. That was a development. That was an improvement. I wouldn't do that at the top weight. But at those middle weights where I'm just doing a bit of volume work, I can do that without pausing. You see often people with waiting to do, if they do a dumbbell press, they lift the weights off and they got the dumbbells resting on their legs and they stay there for a minute. Well, I saw someone doing that once who just picked them up, put them on his legs and lifted. And I've always done that ever since. If you can get them up on your legs, don't pause there. You've got them up and you've got them up. You're partway on the job. Go on and lift. There's nothing to be gained with a pause at that point.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So those are sort of things. You can often pick up some good tips from other excellent exercises. People who are people who are exercising in the gym. There are people who do little things like that you can just incorporate into your own training.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can learn just by watching people.
Yeah, especially when you see them do it with grace and with just body control, and competence. You see someone doing that, and you think, "Wow, that's like gymnastics."
Yeah,
some of the control some people have, is just amazing, and you see that in the workplace occasionally. If you do manual work or farm work, construction work, logging work, you'll see some people who can just hoist heavy loads around and their body just instantly adapts to the load that they've got, and they bring their muscles in to move the load in the most effective way, and it just looks beautiful. If you've got the eye for it, it looks beautiful. It really does.
That's what really interested me, how proficient and artistic it can look just doing simple movements. And it's definitely, obviously you get that in the top levels of sports, but sometimes you get that just simply with training. Well, you can get it with just repetitive work. They're not used so much now, but people used to lift and carry 3 bushel bags of wheat, and I think that's 70 or 80 pounds weight, or they're about 40 kilos, and you could see people carrying loads like that when nowadays you wouldn't be allowed to. It would say there'd be a stamp on the side that would say 16 kilograms, 2 people must lift this weight, but people before did that sort of thing 100, 200 times a day. Yeah,
for
with a bent
years.
spine and no one worried about it.
Well, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. And now I'd say one of the problems with actually what I'm dealing with as a mobility coach, people coming to me with restrictions and pain, is because there's a lot of fear mongering around movement. So
Yes. Oh, yeah. Occupational health and safety, all that
Mhm.
sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And a
Yeah.
lot of the studies are done on very interesting uh, sort of very specific scenarios. So the reason we have the bend your knees when you pick something up, keep your back straight, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The reason we have that is because they were testing it on warehouse workers who actually were not lifting the same loads all the time. They were lifting different loads all the time. And they weren't actually in shape. They weren't athletic. They were often sitting and then lifting. As someone who's not athletic, not trained up, picking something up awkwardly, obviously that's going to increase the injury incidence, especially if it's different all the time. So,
and no warm up. Yep.
yeah, in a warehouse with really bad lighting and really big, chunky boots and all that. So that's when we developed that sign, and now everyone thinks that they need to lift everything in that specific way, even though that only really applies to the warehouse workers in their scenario. There's quite a few studies that came out in the meantime. Don't put your knees over your toes, don't bend your spine, don't do all these things because it causes all these problems, even though they were doing the tests on cadavers or on unrealistic rep ranges. I think there was one that was over 1,000 reps on a dead tissue, and it's like, well, yeah, it's not going to behave the same as a human rep. So there's a lot of fear mongering, and that has also caused a lot of issues. I've had some clients sort of start with me in their 50s and had knee problems since their teen years and never put their knees over their toes. So obviously, to me, it's obvious why they've got knee pain. If they're avoiding that, and their practitioners who are looking after them are actually not helping them develop those abilities, that's obviously going to be a problem if you're out and about, skiing, playing tennis, where your knees will naturally go over the toes. So, that's one of the things we have to sort of battle with. But do you remember any of these things going around in your lifetime, and what were your thoughts when you heard some of them?
You mean the warnings about?
The warnings and the sort of fear mongering over certain types of movement.
I've never taken much notice of the fear mongering outside of the gym. I used to take very seriously what the gym bros say about, you've got to use correct form. I don't think you have to be absolutely fastidious about it. But I once saw someone who didn't know how to exercise, and they made an absolute mess of themselves. And so form is important, but there's much more range of freedom in there than some people should worry about. People, if people think they've got to use correct form every time, they might be frightened off from exercising if they don't know what correct form is, or if they don't know someone who can guide them. And I wouldn't want anyone to be inhibited in activities or extending themselves or whatever because they weren't totally sure just what was the correct form. And many of your exercises too, it's taken me a while to realize what the point of them is. I mean, there's one where we sort of hold our hands gripped and go up and over and around and down and back again. And it was only about a month of that I realized that the main benefit of that is coming at the back, and just extending at the back. And when I first started, in my first few days, I was paying as much attention as with the raise at the front. As I was to the back. As long as the fist are clenched. That's right, yeah.
But some people will struggle with this part. That's the thing. So one of the reason cars is interesting is because, well, you're just putting your joint through the full range of motion. So for every single range it has. And there'll be different sticking points for different people where they have problems. So one of the benefits of it as a warm-up is you kind of get some neurological feedback. Where am I tight? Where are my problems? Where do I need to sort of, put a bit more attention? And, oh yeah, this part's easy. I don't need to worry about that part. But another benefit of it is, say you're not using one range particularly often, or say that range is a little bit tight for you. Like, for example, you just said that's the main benefit, that part. Then suddenly you're going into that range almost every other day to sort of check in, and you're slowly building that awareness and safety sort of thing to go there. And then when you're exercising and doing other exercises specific to that, it's already sort of warmed up and you don't have to sort of fear to get into it. So that's one of the great benefits of cars, as silly as they look.
Yeah, and I can also see in the way you programmed the exercises for me, the sequence that they were in, because that one is the one that you always have preceding your swimmers.
Yeah. Otherwise, that would be very uncomfortable to do before the cars.
That's right. Yeah. So I can see the way that you build the program, and that it's not just a random collection of exercises. It's a day's, or it's a full session that has a logical sequence, one that each one builds on the other, and you wouldn't want to do them in the reverse order, for example.
Exactly. And they're very, very specific. And for you had a very specific personalized program, because we did all the tests and then I programmed it exactly for what we found. And going back to what you said earlier with, the fads and the prepackaged programs and stuff like that. One of the things that we do is we do actually sell some of those because people actually ask for them. And I'm not a fan of them, but one thing we try to do is keep the sequence and at least do every single range of motion that the joint has, but it's just not personalized to the person. So there could be points where it just isn't very good for them. That specific range isn't going. But one of the things that is sold quite a lot on the internet, I try not to look at it because it boils my blood. So I just try to turn it off the second I see it, is all these, pre-packaged, this is perfect for everyone kind of thing. And that's just, there's no such thing as something is perfect for everyone, because we're also very unique and different. And everything you've done in your life, like all your gymnastics as a younger person and your rowing and all these things that you've developed, these skills, they've led you to have certain ranges that are better. They've led you to have certain neurological connections that are better in certain areas. Therefore, you've got a very unique set of movement capabilities now, because of all the things that you've done in the past. And that differs for every single human being. Yeah,
that's so true. Yep.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I think is maybe not thought about very much. And it brings me on to my next question, essentially, which is advice you would give to someone in their 50s or 60s who want to improve or even begin their fitness journey.
Right, those young fellows in their 50s and 60s, yeah. I'd say, just going back to something you said a minute ago, don't look for a pre-packaged program, and certainly don't look at those things in the Times fitness columns or the newspapers, or on YouTube, where it's do this for 8 minutes every day.
Yeah, and then you're fine.
That's right. Just going back a step, don't look for anything that tries to make shortcuts, that says you can do it in just a few minutes a day. In fact, I think you should make, my own rule is reckon on having challenging exercises and effective mobility, rehab, prehab work for 1 or 2 minutes every day for every year of your life. So if I'm 74, I should be doing 148 up to 148 minutes a day of being active. And that includes exercise, it might include walking, it might include stretching, things like that. So that's 1 or 2 minutes a day for every year of your life. So it never
That's
gets
a great
less.
calculation.
It never gets less. It only gets longer.
It only
but it
gets
has
longer.
to. Yeah, it has to. And I also recommend an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
Because I complete the activity circles, and I've got them on display, and I can see them at a glance. They're on the face, because there are 3. It doesn't have to be Apple, of course. It can be any brand, but they've got 3 circles. One they call the movement circle, and Apple sets a limit there. In my case, I've got to use what they calculate as 590 calories a day over and above basal metabolism. Now, occasionally I have done 300%, 200% sometimes, but as long as I've had the Apple Watch, I've done the 100% every day since I've had the Apple Watch. So it's about 1,800 days of without a break.
That's definitely what I love about activity watches, is that it encourages movement.
And it's reasonable levels, and it's achievable, and you get little reminders if you haven't moved, or if you haven't done enough workouts. If you haven't stood enough, they just ask you to move around for 2 minutes an hour. But you get a little beep on your wrist to remind you to do it. And they give you 10 minutes to do it. Now, nothing could be easier. Yeah. And so just moving, just stop being really comfortable and settling like a jelly into your chair for 3 hours. Get up and do that 2 minutes every hour. So that's what I'd reckon for someone who's older. Don't go for fads. Be prepared to put in the time every day. There's no need to have a rest day. If you're not doing weights work, you can be walking. I mean, if you're ill or you've got something special on. I mean, I had a couple of days off because I had my golden wedding anniversary last weekend. Well, my wife and I had our golden wedding anniversary last weekend. And so, that was a couple of days we were away, and I didn't take my stuff with me. I did take a roller, and I did roll a couple of times because we'd been sitting in the car for a while and my back was a bit stiff. So I did some thoracic rolling just for about 5 or 10 minutes. But you can and really should be aiming to be moving just for your waking hours, just at least a couple of minutes, and then complete those other activity circles. The other watches like Garmin must have something similar, I should think.
Yeah, I get the same sort of, it just shouts at me saying move. So.
Yeah, good on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very useful because I think I'm starting to lose my eyesight at such a young age because of the screen work. And obviously I do this job because I love moving. But ironically, I'm now sitting more than ever because
I'll bet.
So yeah, I definitely recommend these because it's very, very easy to sort of. I know people say, oh, it doesn't track the calories or the steps. It doesn't really mean that much, but it does to me because I can roughly tell how much I've moved and roughly tell if I've even moved my legs enough in hip extension as I've walked. Yeah. A very easy way to make your hips go into hip extension without any snazzy exercises. Just walk.
That's right. Yeah. So that's what I'd come up with for people who are starting older. Yeah. I'd also say for someone in their 50s and 60s, be prepared to start at a very low level. Don't be put off if you can't do much. Now, I had an injury from an Achilles injury, which I think came through using an antibiotic that had in the fine print that Achilles tendon injuries can come from it rarely, and I think I got that from the antibiotic. So I was still able to exercise, but I wasn't able to walk very well. So I stopped running, and then I got back into running, and 10 paces was hard. You know, just the first 10 paces was hard because there's just that jolt, and the flesh that's hanging there with each bounce, each step was just uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'd say if someone can't do more than 10 paces, that's fine. If in the first day all you can do is 10 paces, and in the second day you can do 11 paces, it'll still be a bit uncomfortable, but it's one pace more. And then progress just slowly, and at the end of the year you'll be able to do a lot more. You don't have to say, oh, I couldn't ever do that, because you know, 10 paces is better than none. And then you build on it.
I completely agree. Yeah, that's exactly where I started from my car accident. I was a skier when it happened. And then suddenly within a few short weeks, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do any basic things. And that's, you know, that's not such a big problem if it's temporary, but it lasted months and months and months. So my muscles naturally atrophied more on one side than the other. And I couldn't lean forward. I couldn't do anything. So anything that I was used to, you know, being training, in my eyes, that's what training was. It was suddenly impossible. And I had to figure out how to sort of start again from scratch. And it was like that. It was like 10 paces first. And then it was, you know, maybe I could do, I tried to cycle. I couldn't cycle. My kneecaps were doing something funny, and suddenly my whole body wasn't working. But it's just finding what can work after an injury like that. And it happens to so many people in all age brackets. And that's one of the reasons they stop. Quite often it's, oh, I did this, but I got an injury, so I stopped exercising. But that's the opportunity to learn, I suppose, about your body and how it works and how you can master it. Because one thing that really did scare me was how in the age, you know, I was in my early 20s, how something like that can happen and take away all your autonomy, and you don't know how to fix it, and you're just, that's it. You don't know what to do, and you don't have power over your own movement. And I do think that it would be very nice if we all could study, you know, how the joints function, how you can regress things, how, you know, you can start again from scratch, essentially.
That's right, or adapt. And one of the reasons that I do the deadlifts the way I do with a relatively straight legs is because I've had hemorrhoids problems, and so I don't really want to squat right down very low. So I do but I haven't given them up. In fact, you know, I've been able to progress and do more. And I've also had a heart problem too, which means that if my heart goes very, very fast, it could flip into fibrillation, which wouldn't have a happy ending. And so I do a lot of low reps. I don't do 10 reps of deadlifts. I just do singles or 2 or 3, and I use my Apple Watch again to monitor my pulse, and I don't go on to the next set until my pulse has gone down to a certain level that I reckon is safe. So the heart problem, by the way, came from antibiotic again. That's another one of the fine print. It can give the Achilles tendon, and it can also occasionally cause heart problems. And that's what I had. I noticed it first when I was doing kettlebell squats, goblet squats with a 32 kilo kettlebell, and I was trying to get my pulse up. And this is about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And suddenly my heart was going boom, 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 boom. And it was like a wooden marble in a box, in a wooden box. It was sort of shaking like that. And so then I had a few tests, and I realized I've got that limit, but it hasn't meant that I've stopped training. It's just, it means that I've worked out a way to continue training and to improve with something that might have caused somebody else to give up and do nothing.
Yeah, I agree. That's often how it works, and you're proving that, you know, if you're.
But you did too from your recovery. You must have. Well, I won't say you must have felt it was a good experience to go through, but you've learned a lot that you wouldn't have ever been able to go through with personal knowledge.
Strangely, I feel like it's a good thing now. Obviously, at the time, I was like, well, this is very unfortunate and very unlucky. And what are the chances? Because it happened twice within a very short space of time. I think I was 17 at the first one. I think 22 or 23 at the second one. And yeah, also there were passengers in the car. I was a passenger on the first one, but everyone else in the car is fine. So I just thought, oh, that's unlucky. What are the chances of that? Twice. But it did teach me a lot, and it also taught me a lot about my tissue type. When you've got slightly more hypermobile tissue, you're more likely to have issues with your discs, with impact injuries, things like that, SI joint, things like that. But yeah, I mean, the doctors telling me I couldn't was quite motivational. They said, you're not going to be able to lift, you're not going to be able to walk properly, you're not going to be able to, that's not going to heal, your nerve is damaged for good. Albeit some of my nerves are not perfect. I still have some interesting issues, like if I deadlift, my hand used to get stuck. I couldn't open it. I'd have to ask someone in the gym to pull my fingers as I moved away to sort of stretch them out. I don't have to do that anymore, luckily, which was a very odd request, just asking someone to grab it. And I used to have nerve issues in different parts of my body, but that's slowly actually improving, and that's by mistake, I think, just simply because I've first of all done the rehab to relearn everything. But I wonder how much also supplementing with lion's mane has helped, because obviously that's a neurogenesis, and apparently it does help with nerve tissue. And my nerve damage was continuous until about maybe a few years ago. It started going away, and at that point I've already been supplementing with that. So I don't know whether it's partly supplement, partly the mobility training, or it's a combination. I don't know, but slowly I don't have to do the hand thing anymore, and I'm getting some of the things.
Well, that's one of the things I've noticed from your mobility training. I've had little benefits from that. I've had I've got greatly increased mobility in my neck, so I can now reverse a car legally, or safely. My son said, "You're looking taller."
Yeah, that a lot of people mention that. Yeah.
So that came directly from your work. I've had far fewer night cramps, not directly from your training, but because I've been motivated from your training and from knowing what I can do to look at other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to get a lot of night cramps in my calves, and now I roll the calves with the sort of roller that you had me doing for the thoracic rolling.
Mm-hmm.
I do that for the calves, and no night cramps. Now, no night cramps means no pain, but it also means I get a lot more sleep, because if you get cramps, very often they come at that time of night that your sleep should be the most beneficial, between around about the 2 o'clock in the morning. And if you break that sleep every night or every second night for your life, you're going to shorten your life. You're not going to be able to continue in good health. So that's another thing that's come from the training that you've given me as well.
That's great. I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah. So that.
Okay, so I do have one last question, because I know I'm taking a lot of your time and you have to go. But what advice would you like to give our listeners? Anything that you hold dear, or anything that maybe something that you do every day that you find is massively beneficial to your health and longevity?
I think we've covered most of those earlier on. But I think it's important to understand that fitness and health is a wide-ranging thing. Mobility is not going to be the solution to everything. Exercise isn't, diet isn't, sleep isn't. But without all those and a few others, you're not going to have really good health. You've really got to, all those things affect your hormones, and even sunlight affects your hormones. So, you're only going to get good health if you've got a sort of optimal hormonal production and flow and utilization, and you've got to get all those things within a satisfactory range. You're never going to pinpoint it, and you shouldn't try to, but you've got to understand that all those things are important. Back in 2002, I set up the world's first website for paleo fitness, and it fell into disuse, and it's no longer on the internet. I lost the domain name, but I've always been interested in that paleo or evolutionary fitness way of looking at exercise and health, and how everything is sort of tied together. And if it's something that is impossible in the Paleolithic environment, I stand back and look at it a little bit skeptically. As far as gadgets are concerned, and as far as supplements are concerned, stick to things that would be possible for the human being in a natural environment. People often say, don't they, don't eat any food that your grandmother wouldn't recognize, or don't eat anything that has labels that you can't pronounce, ingredients you can't pronounce. And that's more or less the same sort of mindset. I think that's appropriate too. I'd also say, just repeat, ignore all the fads, because there are no effective shortcuts. We would have known about them by now, and it wouldn't have been something we worked out in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. It would have been something that would have been around for thousands of years. And every shortcut or fad has a downside as well. Sometimes you don't know about it, you don't find out about it until it's too late. And I'd also say you can get physically strong and healthy through mental health and strength too. I mentioned being a self-starter, having a discipline, making it a priority, and sticking with it. That's the sort of thing.
I think that's really, really great advice, and I agree with everything you've said, and I've really, really enjoyed speaking to you and learning more about your journey, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of what you're going to achieve in the coming years, because I'm sure there'll be much, much more. And thank you very much for taking your time and chatting, and I'd love to have you back on sometime and see how you're doing.
That'd be lovely, Hallie. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for the guidance you've given me too. I'm no longer an active client of yours, but I'm still keeping up with the exercises you've given me, making slight substitutions to match with my own fitness regime, and it's working out really well.
I saw the
so thank you.
The program that you wrote down very meticulously. It's beautiful, and it's got so many good elements in there. It's really exciting to see that you're continuing on. And it's great. I'm really happy to see that.
Okay, that's great. Righto.
All right.
Goodbye,
thank
Hallie.
you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Righto, will do. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.